Record.
Now? Hello?
Yeah, we're good. We're recording.
All right. Should I do my name thing? Say my name?
Your name is
My name
kind of
is
there.
Noah Greenblatt.
Okay, hi, and my name's Eli. I'm Mikey. So we're actually going to be reading this book, and we just thought it'd be a fun idea to record our thoughts on it because it's a very thought-provoking kind of thing. It's by my favorite, Rabbi Sachs. It's backwards.
Woo!
Yeah, and just the name of the book is From Optimism to Hope, and he makes a very clear distinction between the two. How optimism is the belief that things will get better, while hope is the belief that you can make something better. And it's an interesting idea, optimism to hope, turning from passive to active. And at first, like, you read these stories, these are from his radio talk he did once a week from 2 decades ago, really. So it's recordings from that, but every single piece is that idea from stopping to be passive and starting to become active. Stop believing that things will get better and start making things better. And with that, we'll read his piece from September 11th, 2003, where terror is defeated. Today is the second anniversary of 9/11, the day that changed the world, and which of us will ever forget it. Looking back on that day 2 years ago, I think of the courage, the heroism, the simple humanity it called forth. I think of the New York firemen, so many of whom lost their lives saving lives. I think of the passengers on the fourth plane, Flight 93, who fought back and crashed their plane into a field so that others would not die. And of the thousands who tended the wounded, comforted the bereaved, and gave shelter to those who were stranded. It was they who, in the midst of terror, gave birth to hope, because compassion runs deeper than hate, and the human instinct for freedom will always eventually win against those whose idea of conflict resolution is to kill those with whom they disagree. But terror has not yet been defeated. Since then, there have been deadly attacks in India, Pakistan, Tunisia, the Philippines, Bali, Mombasa, Yemen, Kuwait, Casablanca, and the list goes on. And this was written around 20 years ago. The list only got longer. 36 hours ago, a friend of my brother was sitting in a cafe in Jerusalem. His name was David Applebaum, a hero who dedicated his life to saving the lives of others. He headed Jerusalem's emergency medical service, treating all victims of terror regardless of race or creed. Yesterday should have been the happiest day of his life. His daughter was getting married, and the night before the ceremony, he had taken her out for a coffee when the bomb went off. Yesterday, instead of the wedding, both of them were buried. If anything is evil, terror is. It strikes the young, the old, the innocent. It is destruction for destruction's sake. It never achieved anything that could not have been achieved by diplomacy or peaceful protest. And terrorists always end up harming their own people and their cause. One who dies for the sake of faith is called a martyr, but one who kills for the sake of faith is a blasphemer, because he or she desecrates the one thing on which God has set his image, life itself. And so, 2 years later, the world still needs our prayers for comfort for the bereaved and healing for the wounded. Above all, it needs all of us to say in the name of our respective faiths that deliberate killing of the innocent is evil. Whoever does it, whoever it is done against. Terror must be defeated in the human heart if it is to be defeated in our suddenly vulnerable world. And that's his thought of the day.
It's
What are your
crazy how,
thoughts?
it's only gotten more applicable to real life. That's real life, to now life, modern times.
So, yeah, I find it interesting that that's a 2.5 minute thought that he shared in 2003, that he decided, I'm not sure if you've read it, or in 2015, he wrote a book called Not in God's Name, which is all about, it's similar, it's more focused, but also much longer, about religious terrorism. And how that is people like to say they're killing in God's name, and his response, there is no such thing. But yeah, he found it prominent enough to spend many hours writing that book, and it's very good, and he got quite awarded for it. But yeah, it's definitely an interesting idea.
I think his definition of terrorism is interesting. It's terrorism, right, is, at least in my understanding, defined as some, a violent act aimed at terror, scaring people, right? Not more to prove a point. Like,
Yeah. How is that?
I guess typically it's used in a religious setting, but like it's more to like, at least in my head, it's to scare people into doing something, right? Religious terrorism, what does it scare people into doing? Nothing, except attacking you. So
What do
is it
you?
really terror?
What was? What? How does his definition contradict with your definition?
So 9/11, right, is what he's talking about. So what really was the goal, I guess, was to scare people into doing what? Or just to be scared? Like, what's the message? You're not safe in your own country? I don't know.
Yeah. I don't know the exact motives for that attack.
Like, it's
But
clearly an act of terror for sure.
Yeah.
You know, people were horrified. People are still horrified. What was the goal?
I'm not sure. That might be something to look into. But more recently, it seems that global terror, at least the ones we hear about, are religious focused.
Mm.
Like, I don't know. I'm not the most educated on the topic of terroristic motivations.
No, neither am I. No.
But Alan Dershowitz writes about it a bit, that in his book The Case for Israel, is that it works. And actually, one of the things that Rabbi Sachs talks about is that terrorism is a byproduct of something else that's going on. And he quotes Jonathan Haidt. I'll get that into a second. But the idea, some places create communities that only exist because they have a common enemy. They create a scapegoat because without someone else to blame their problems on, people will see the problems within and crumble apart. And how you need that common enemy to really put yourself together. And it's not a crazy idea. We know it from history. War brings a country together because you unite under a common purpose. Even in textbooks,
got us out of the Great Depression.
Yeah, like even in some textbooks, it's like pros and cons of the army. Pros, they were fighting for something they believe in. That's a reason that people win wars, because they come together. And when we have these communities that terrorize, and all, not all, but like you have Jewish terrorists, also you have Catholic terrorists, you have the Crusades, you have Muslim terrorists, and when we're talking religious focused, they create an outsider to be the other. And this idea, when we create an us and a them, Jonathan Haidt says it binds us and it blinds us. How it brings us very close together, but it dehumanizes the other. And that's also one of the phrases that's used in Nazi Germany. They had to dehumanize the other so that they were able to do what they did. Yeah, terrorism is a byproduct of creating a non-human other who is just in your way.
Okay, so I'm kind of thinking about two different things. First of all, have you heard about what's going on in Israel right now?
What exactly?
There's been a series of attacks on religious Jews, like on subways. I've seen a couple videos. They're just awful. But in retaliation, some of the Jews have been attacking Arabs, or the other way around. You know, who I don't know exactly who started first. Either way, people are attacking each other of different religions, and it's escalated. And there are attacks all over Brooklyn now on religious Jews, and it's just horrifying to watch. And people have been calling it acts of terrorism, I believe. I don't, don't quote me there. I don't know. I believe people have been calling it acts of terrorism, at least in Israel, religious terrorism. And it's kind of just scary, and it's interesting that is still so prevalent, all over the place. We're fighting so many different injustices, and then we just keep stacking them on top of each other.
Yeah.
Just one after another.
Like recently, there's been anti-Asian hate crimes. That's not religious focus. That's just bias and prejudice.
Culture.
We have genocides happening across the world.
And
so I don't know if these
brutality
are actually,
and other forms of racism in America all over the world. There's the list goes on and on.
Some places are trying to more bring it to here's a very different idea. Did you see Captain America? No, nope. Falcon and the Winter Soldier?
I did, yes.
So they are a very popular platform, and they're bringing these issues to light. Like, what does it mean to represent something no one before you would have represented just because of how you were born? So it's an interesting idea.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Sure. The other thing I was thinking of is the I don't remember what they were calling it, but the attack on the White House. People were calling that terrorism too.
Yeah.
And that's from those were Americans committing an act of terror on other Americans.
That gets back. He actually wrote about this in Morality, Rabbi Sachs, that we need to learn what it means to disagree but get along. Because he talks about social media also impacting this. If you ever seen The Social Dilemma, they talk about how social media is radicalizing people and how we've just come so far apart that we are the same people. These are our neighbors, yet we've learned to dehumanize them because it's what we've been taught to do. So these things that we thought were abroad or between different groups, it's starting to break groups themselves apart.
It's not me, of course, obviously. Not me. It can't be me.
What? No, but here, I just want to look at the end again. That he says, like, we have the people who do these things that dehumanize the other and fight against the other. He makes the point that terrorists always end up harming their own people and their cause.
That also just happened in Israel. They launched rockets from Gaza. And what do you know? Landed on your own territory and killed however many people.
Yeah.
Great. Good going, Gaza. Woohoo.
Yeah. Rockets are not fun, but.
Oh. Yeah. Is it 40 rockets in 2 days? Something like that.
Yeah. So he mentions it here. I think he brings it home in the last line that it's a very prominent issue. He wrote this in 2003. Still a very prominent issue. He wrote, so far we touched upon 2 of his books that were written between then and now. That I think this is a very, terror must be defeated in the human heart if it is to be defeated in our suddenly vulnerable world. And I think everything we were talking about up until now was the vulnerable world half, how these global scales of people versus people. But he says it starts in one place, and that's us, the human heart. So before we
change the world, you first have to change yourself.
Yeah, like Louis C.K., not a solid role model, but he said something that I feel is a bit relevant. It's a joke. It's not a good joke, but he said that he's a subtle racist. That if he's in the subway and he sees a group of white people, okay. But if he sees a group of black people, he thinks, I'm fine. I'm totally fine. And that's the subtle racism that have been ingrained possibly into us here.
Absolutely into us.
Yeah.
No one is innocent of that.
Yeah, it's just ingrained prejudice and bias. And I think that's one of the things, that's what he was getting at the last line there, that there's so much that needs to change. And when it comes to, yes, we have these huge things we want to solve, but when it comes to where it starts, that's us.
I listened to a podcast recently, and it's about more personal growth, similar stuff. And there's a 3-step process. This guy says, I don't remember his name, but he's pretty wicked smart, way smarter than me. And he says, first you have to be aware of your negative behavior, or what you want to change or whatever. Then you have to accept it. You have to accept that you're wrong, that this behavior is bad, that it's part of you, but also that you can change it. then the third step is actualizing, going out and actually making an effort to make that change and to change your behavior. And it's important to understand that you have to be aware of it and to accept it, and only then can you start to change.
Amen.